Okay, welcome everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I know we'll still have some folks joining us, but welcome to our monthly Cities, Towns, and Counties webinar series with the Great Trail State and the Great Trail State Coalition. I'm Julie Judkins. I'm the coordinator of the Great Trail State Coalition. Here with Palmer today and Gretchen, who's our speaker, but I'm going to give you just a brief overview for anyone who might be new to the Great Trail State or the Great Trail State Coalition. We welcome you. We welcome everyone to these webinars to help us grow the Great Trail State. So the vision is around having all 100 North Carolina counties enjoy a healthy, safe environment and economic development, tourism, transportation, and environmental benefits that we know trails can provide. And success for our coalition is in adequate recurring funding for the Great Trail State program, state policies and programs that really help support trail development and management, and a really strong and popular Great Trail State brand so that anyone can use it and let everyone in the world know that North Carolina is a great trail state. So when you are in North Carolina, you're really never very far from a great trail experience. So the brand is really about inviting all to participate, nonprofits, municipal partners in towns, agencies, industry partners. It's all different kinds of surfaces too. It's not just natural surfaces. We've got water and paved. We've got all different kinds of uses between equestrian and biking and rolling and walking and paddling. And again, across all 100 counties, so that together we are collectively North Carolina's Great Trails State. And we couldn't do it without all of you who are members. Thank you so much. We have 135 different individual, nonprofit, local government, and industry partners that make the work possible of the coalition. And we really couldn't do it without you. And thank you so much for your ongoing support to the Great Trails State. And because of your support, we have been able to have some really great legislative successes in just a few short years. Starting in 2021 with the Year of the Trail designation. You all may remember that campaign that happened in 2023. But the General Assembly also provided for almost 30 million in Complete the Trails Fund, which is only for designated state trails. So a 2022 feasibility study really helped build the bridge to the advocacy and work that made it to the General Assembly in providing for 25 million in the Great Trail State program, which allowed for all different trail types. And it was one-time money, and we're still invested and working on making that a recurring investment from our General Assembly. There was also 5 million that in 2023 that additionally went to the Complete the Trails program, again, back to those designated state trails. And last year, or 2024 now, we also had the Great Trails State Day designated, and that is now an annual celebration that we have every October, and that was possible through the NC Farm Act. We also wouldn't have all of these amazing trail investments and infrastructure without the help of our agency partners. And so we work alongside each of our agencies in this work together. So thank you. This webinar series, the Cities, Towns, and Counties for Trails is a resource for all coalition members and all communities, all cities, towns, and counties across North Carolina. And so we encourage you to tell your friends, tell your government officials, get them on board with learning more about the impacts and awesome benefits of trails. We're so excited to hear from Gretchen today about the designing the intersection of NCDOT's prioritization process with trail projects. And then next month in March, we have Jason and John from Permatract with a presentation titled Bridging the Gap. And they will break down the fundamentals of boardwalk and bridge design, and really talking about the importance of bridges. And in April, we have Vonda Martin with NC Parks and Rec to unpack how the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan is developed. So stay tuned and register for these on our website, Great Trails State Coalition /CTCT. You can register. You can not only register, but you can also see all of the library of webinars that we have are hosted there on that site. Again, this is the Great Trail State is all of ours. It's all of us here in North Carolina promoting and making it the Great Trail State. So the brand is an open source. The resources are available to all. We encourage you to go to greattrailsnc.com and click on brand. There are toolkits, there are coloring books, there are logos that you can use and add to your own websites and make it your own. We've just launched this week a new merch site, so that's very exciting. Please go to our store and get your trail mugs and shirts. And please do a really powerful way for you to leverage your events and your organizations and your trails is to tag us. We have a huge and growing following on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, and it's a really great way to collaborate and to make the story go further by tagging us. And my last plug here is we hope that we see you all in August in Winston-Salem for the Great Trail State Conference. This will be the second time we've hosted the conference. It's August 8th through 12th. We're so excited to be back together and see everyone in person and hear from amazing speakers. We're soon to announce a really exciting keynote speaker, so stay tuned for that. Be sure to be submitting your proposals, which are due on March 6th. Registration will open on the 16th. And if you're interested in sponsorship, we couldn't do this conference and gathering without our conference sponsors. So thank you so much to those of you who have sponsored the event. If you're a member, you get a discount as a sponsor, and that early bird sponsorship for membership discount ends at the end of April, so be sure to get it then. We have a Film Fest call that's also open, and we're really so excited about all of the events and activities that are being planned as part of the conference. So thank you all so much. I'm going to hand it to Iona really briefly to add a bit about the Great Trail State Coalition. Thank you, Iona.
And what a great job. I feel like that was just awesome. Very concise and informative. We are accomplishing a lot. We have accomplished a lot. The Great Trail State Coalition has always operated on a long time frame, playing a long game to achieve this vision of the Great Trail State. And we find ourselves at a real crossroads or testing point in the organization. As you all know, from a legislative point of view, we did not get a budget in this past session. And it's unclear going into the next session if how successful we will be. One of our largest expenditures, the largest expenditure that the coalition outlays is for professional lobbyists. We have two organizations that are one of, if not the best, but the two best in the state. One that's really super on the House side, one that's great on the Senate side. The successes that Julie shared with you are the direct result of investing in that high quality lobbying, that knowledge of what is the best way to proceed. And part of that is we did in the 2024 budget, when we got the Great Trail State program, the coalition received some capacity funding to help us do what we're doing today, which is bringing you CTCT and Julie's participation and leadership in the coalition. That catalyst funding doesn't have a backstop. So we are turning to our membership and really focusing on our municipal membership. So some of you that are on are members of the coalition, and we thank you so much. Some of you have been members of the coalition almost from the very beginning and have been along with us for the whole ride. It is imperative for us in 2026 to expand the tent. I know most of your municipalities are going through a budgeting process right now. We would really be grateful to welcome you as a member to the coalition. You don't have to be a member to get the great resources that you get through cities, towns, and counties. That's open to everyone. But your support will enable us to keep doing the good work we're doing. We do, if I'm being quite honest, we've got some anxiety about how to make all the ends meet without the capacity funding from the legislature. So we're going to put the link to our membership page down in the chat. If you have any questions about it, please let Palmer or Julia or myself know. And just know that you will make a huge difference, and we are committed to bringing you value. So if you've got questions, please reach out to us or another municipality. We'd be happy to get you in touch with one of our municipalities that are members so that they can share the value that they get out of being members of the coalition. So I'm going to get off my please help us soapbox. But we would love to welcome you into the coalition. And thanks for making time for me, Julie. I appreciate you letting me jump in on the agenda.
Thank you, Iona, for your leadership and all you've done to create this amazing coalition that we've got. Okay, we're going to hand it now over to Gretchen Belk. And Gretchen, we're so excited and honored that to have you join our webinar series today. Gretchen is the Strategic Prioritization Office Manager with the North Carolina DOT. Thank you, Gretchen. I'll let you introduce yourself further and tell us about SPOT.
Hey, good afternoon. Just want to confirm you all can hear me, right?
We can hear you, yes.
Amazing. And I'm telling my PowerPoint to start. Can we see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to say thanks to the coalition for having me today for your lunch and learn. And thanks to everyone who chose to join us today to talk about prioritization at NCDOT. So again, my name is Gretchen Belk. I am the manager of the SPOT office at NCDOT. And today, we are going to be talking a little bit about transportation funding, high-level background, at least the way that we see funding at the Department of Transportation. Then we're going to talk about the STI law, which is a law passed in North Carolina that really dictates how North Carolina can spend their transportation funding that we manage. We do this through a process called prioritization. So we're going to look at that and see how it works in practice. And then we'll talk about some takeaways at the end of my presentation. And I'm also happy to answer any questions. All right, so first, let's just jump quickly into a transportation funding background. So here on the screen, you all can see a typical transportation project's life cycle. So first, you are going to identify a need. So you're going to see a problem and you're going to say, hey, this needs to be fixed. This needs to be improved. Then you're going to start working and planning with most likely your local community to determine what's the best way to address this problem. Then the next step is going to be involving other stakeholders and folks who can help you at the regional level. So that could be coordination with your metropolitan planning organizations, your rural planning organizations, your NCDOT divisions, and coordinating like that if y'all are interested in getting state or federal funds to work on your project. Then there comes the issue of getting the money to fund your project. That at NCDOT is called the prioritization process. Once your project has made it through prioritization and wins funding to be able to move forward, we program that project into a financial planning document called the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program. Which is our 10-year financial planning document that shows all of the projects that we will be working on in the state that uses federal or state funding. And then the project can start. You can actually do the fun part of building the project, designing it, constructing it, and then afterwards you got to maintain it and take care of it, for the rest of that project's useful life. So we like to start off with this slide just to kind of show that the process of getting the funding for your project a lot of times can be a pinch point for you all to get to the finish line to be able to actually have a project on the ground. So here is a little bit of background on STI, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, but it's the State Transportation Investments Law. And this is basically how NCDOT is required to use the funding that we have available for capital projects, so like new construction types of projects. So NCDOT funds 6 modes of transportation throughout the state. So we've got highway, aviation, bicycle and pedestrian, ferry projects, public transportation, and rail. These are all the modes that we support at the department. And we also have an annual budget of about $7.3 billion. We have that kind of designated between capital projects. So these are new projects or expansions, things like that. And then we also have maintenance. So a lot of the funding at the department also has to go towards maintaining the assets, facilities that we have built and maintain. So we have about $4 billion available each year for capital projects. And we go through something called STI, or prioritization, to determine how to spend those funds. So the key partners in this process, we have 3 groups that submit projects through this process. So we have metropolitan planning organizations, rural planning organizations, and then we have the 14 divisions within NCDOT that are divided geographically. And I see we have some MPOs and some RPOs on the call. So hey folks, good to see you. All right. Okay, so how did we get where we are now? So project selection reform is something that was a major priority, not only at NCDOT, but at our legislative level as well within the state. Prior to the STI law passing, there was kind of a perception that folks down on Jones Street were the ones that were deciding where the project money was going through NCDOT. Again, this is a perception. There may have been some limited transparency about the process in advance. So the STI law was passed, and the real goal of it was creating transparency, opportunities for local input, and a data-driven approach. They wanted to take the politics out of transportation project selection. They wanted it to be a clear and transparent process. So the result of this desire for project selection reform led to the STI law, which was passed in 2013. And this law, it was passed at the state, so it's a state law, and it basically says NCDOT has to use a process to select transportation projects in the state. It needs to be systematic. It needs to be data-driven. It needs to have quantitative data, qualitative data, needs to look at all modes and have multimodal characteristics, and the public needs to be involved as well. So there needs to be local input. So that really is the STI law and kind of what it says and how it got here. So a little bit more detail about the STI law. Again, this is capital expenditure. So these are new projects or expansion projects throughout all modes of transportation, maintenance, safety, things like that. Those are funded through other mechanisms that aren't required to go through this process. The way in which this project or this program works is it needs to be needs-based and data-driven, and prioritization results have to be directly tied to funding. So as part of the STI process, we are scoring projects. Every project is given a score. We'll go into detail about that a lot in a few slides, but we can't just score a project and then fund whatever and not even look at the scores. We have to go down the list. The top scoring project must be funded, then the next scoring, then the next scoring. You can't jump, you can't do anything like that. The results need to be tied to the funding. It designates which funding programs need to go through this process. And we also have something called the Prioritization Work Group, which is a group made of various stakeholders that use prioritization. And we meet every cycle prior to the next round of projects being submitted to continuously work on improving the program. So right now we're in our 8th round of prioritization. The work group always has things that we are looking towards improving for future cycles. All right, so how does prioritization and programming look? How does this work? So first we have our STI law. We know that tells us it needs to be quantitative, it needs to be needs-based, et cetera, et cetera. Through the STI law, priorities are established for the types of transportation projects that we want to fund at the state. And by we, I mean, the work group, our stakeholders, things like that. So we have our priorities established, and then we have various funding categories in which projects are considered, and they are based on project type and size. So we have 3 funding categories. So there's statewide mobility projects, regional impact projects, and division needs projects. So that's how they're competing in prioritization. And then once we finish up this process where we give our projects a score, or our projects earn a score, I should say, the projects selected are ultimately added to our 10-year financial planning document called the State Transportation Improvement Program, or the STIP. So the end of a prioritization cycle where we go through the process of scoring projects and then funding the ones that score high enough is this 10-year financial planning document. All right, so let's go into the law a little bit more and see how it structures the process of prioritization at the department. So the STI law is very prescriptive in certain ways, and it also leaves a fair amount of flexibility in other areas that the work group provides recommendations to the Board of Transportation, North Carolina DOT's Board of Transportation, to adopt. So the STI law is very strict in saying what the funding categories are. That's that statewide mobility, regional impact, and division needs that I just showed, but we'll go into that in more details. Project eligibility, so what types of projects are eligible at each category. It also is clear on what the scoring criteria must be for highway projects. and the funding constraints. So how much funding can go to each category and things like that. So all of that is defined in the law, but there is flexibility in a lot of the administrative ways in which this program is ran or is put together. So the scoring process, so the time frame, how long this takes, how many submittals can be submitted, carryovers, which is a part of the prioritization process, all of that has flexibility. The highway measures and weights. So we know the scoring criteria names. We know that safety has to be included in the highway score, but the how much safety weighs on a project's overall score and how you measure safety, that is an opportunity where the work group can provide recommendations for how the project would actually be scored. Similarly with non-highway criteria, so those are our other modes, there it does not say in law what those criteria have to be. There just needs to be 4 of them per mode. And then the measures, how do you measure the criteria itself and how much does that weigh towards your total score? All of those things are flexibility. Also normalization, which is the funding allocation between modes, and local input points, which we'll go into more detail later. So key takeaway, the law is very prescriptive about certain things, but there is flexibility in other elements of the prioritization process. So how does STI really work in practice? So first off, 40% of the total available funds for capital projects is going to go to projects that are statewide mobility in their category. And so the category statewide mobility is really focusing on addressing significant congestion and bottlenecks. So these are large projects. Think of your interstates, your military routes, things like that, that have a significant congestion, things like that. So the 40% of available capital funding goes towards these types of projects. And the way that they are evaluated is going to be 100% on quantitative data. So we know the criteria for how we have to score projects. We know how to measure them. All of that criteria is going to be 100% of that project score. Next, we have the next 30% of available funds, and these go to projects that are called regional impact. These are projects that have a lower impact, not to an individual, but on a scale perspective. And so these are projects that are focusing on improving connectivity within regions. So, we're not talking about major interstates or things like that, but things a little bit more on the regional connector level. For these projects, 70% of the total score is going to come from your quantitative score. So that, measures and criteria that have been established by either the STI law or the work group. And then 30% of your project score is going to come from local input. Local input is a really interesting element of the STI law and the projects and the way that we score things. I'll show kind of how that comes into play in a few slides, but basically a project is given an opportunity from the submitters that the project is in the project area for. So it's always going to be a division, and it's always going to be at least one planning organization, and they can put points on a project up to 100 points. So I'll go into more detail on a later slide, but just know that for regional impact projects, it's going to be 30% of the total available funds. 70% of a project score is going to go to its quantitative score, and then 30% is going to go to local input. And projects in this category compete against other projects in the same region that they are located. So statewide mobility projects all compete against each other because they're statewide. Regional impact projects compete against each other in the region. And then lastly, we have division needs projects, which are the smallest by way of impact again or scale. So these are projects that focus on local needs. 50% of your score is going to come from quantitative data, and 50% of your score is going to come from local input. So half of that score is coming from the criteria weights and measures that have been established, and then half of the score is going to come from the local input from the planning organizations and divisions that are in the project area. And these projects compete against other projects in the same division. So they're not competing against each other statewide, they're competing for funding within their division. So it's kind of local projects against local projects. All right. Okay, so this page is showing what types of projects are eligible at every funding category. So I know we are with the Great Trails State Coalition right now, so I'm going to focus on bicycle and pedestrian projects. The STI law is our guidance, not guidance, it's law, but the STI law establishes what the criteria or the categories and the eligibility are per mode. So the STI law says that bicycle pedestrian projects are all only eligible under division needs in that category. And also, I'm sure you all are very familiar with the fact that there is the state law that says that state funding cannot be allocated to a standalone bicycle and pedestrian project. So what this means in practice is that projects that are selected through prioritization that are bicycle and pedestrian or a standalone bicycle and pedestrian project needs to be funded with federal funds, which, the department is allocated a lot of federal funding by the federal government or USDOT, which is part of this prioritization process. So on the funding side, if a bicycle pedestrian project scores high enough to get funding, we just put federal funding on it. But as you all know, a lot of federal funding requires a 20% non-federal match. And so since state funds are not allowed to go on standalone bicycle and pedestrian projects, a lot of times that 20% non-federal match is going to need to come from locals in order to fully fund the project. So bicycle pedestrian projects, they're eligible at the division needs category, and they are likely going to require a 20% non-federal match. I think one thing that I also want to point out here is, federal funding, federal transportation funding, in a lot of the language will talk about how the project needs to serve a transportation purpose. It cannot be a recreation project. I think you all know better than anyone that a lot of trails that may appear to be recreation in nature also do serve a very important transportation connection to some folks. So I think it's more about telling the project story than it is making sure that it's eligible. But, just want to say out there, sometimes they might want to look twice if it's a recreational loop, but, we know that loops and things like that can still provide access and connectivity to lots of folks. All right, so how does the scoring actually look? So we have quantitative criteria in all of our categories, and we also have qualitative criteria as part of prioritization. Our qualitative criteria is our local input points. So in order to make things easy, projects are scored from a 0 to 100 scale, and as we talked about earlier, projects are selected in ranked order. So let's just say the highest scoring project got all 100 points. That one would be funded, then 99.8, then 99.7, et cetera, et cetera. The legislation requires these criteria to be the quantitative scores for highway projects. And again, there's flexibility within the work group to come up with how those are actually measured and how much they weigh towards your final score. And then those non-highway modes have a minimum of 4 quantitative criteria that need to be developed. All right, so quantitative score versus local input. So as a refresher, the statewide mobility projects are going to be 100% based on quantitative data. So for example, you have 6 criteria that you are developing or that you're using to score a transportation project. So say it's, safety, congestion, economic competitiveness, things like that. They're all going to weigh differently towards your final score, but your total score is going to be based on that quantitative score. Once you get to regional impact projects, you still have your quantitative criteria and you have your individual weights that are going towards the project, but that's only going to make up 70% of your project's total score because 30% of that is going to come from local input. And then similarly with the division needs category, you still have all of your quantitative criteria. They're just making up only half of the score rather than the full score, like what we see with statewide mobility. So with regional impact and division needs, the local input score is actually divided in half. So divisions, NCDOT divisions provide points for the project that make up half of the local input score. And then the planning organizations where the project is located also make up the local input score for half for that project. So for a regional impact project, 70% of your points are going to come from the quantitative score. So say you got a perfect score in everything, you would get 70 points for your quantitative score. And then say you blow it out of the park, you get your 100% local input from your divisions and from your MPOs and RPOs, you're going to get another 30 points to your projects for 100 points total. But, similarly on the flip side, say you get support from your division, but maybe not your MPO or RPO, then your project would only get either 75% or 85% of your total score, depending on what category you're in. Cascading is a part of prioritization, where if your project is, say, for example, a statewide mobility project and it isn't selected for funding, it will cascade down and then be rescored at the regional impact category. Using those measures, weights, and a local input element. And then if they aren't selected or your regional impact project isn't selected, those cascade down again and compete at the division needs category using those criterias, weights, and new local input for that process. So that's a part of prioritization. All right, so here on the screen, we can see the scoring for bicycle and pedestrian projects. This is the scoring that we have right now for our P8 cycle. We are currently working on quantitative scoring review right now, so projects have already been submitted. This is going to be the methodology for how these projects get half of their score. Because as a refresher, bicycle and pedestrian projects are only eligible at the division needs category, which is going to have a total score from 50% quantitative and 50% local input. So these percentages add up to 50 because it's 50% of the total project score. And I'll leave this here for a minute just so folks can look at those measures. All right. And then also just as a refresher with this, the criteria, the measures, and the weights were all developed by the work group and then recommended to the Board of Transportation for approval. So there is no requirement in the STI law for what the criteria must be. There just needs to be 4. All right, so next, let's kind of wrap it all up and see how this process works from beginning to end. So we do have an iterative scoring and programming process, and it's going to start off with project submittal. So we have our planning organizations and our NCDOT divisions that are the project submitters for this prioritization process. Once projects are submitted, the spot office reviews the projects. First, we look at eligibility. Then we're looking at the data to make sure that the data is sound and it looks okay. We have help from our partners with that as well. And many other partners help us with scoring. And then we ultimately are able to calculate a quantitative score for the project. So, as you all know, statewide mobility projects are based 100% on the quantitative score. So our planning and our programming folks can determine which projects are going to be able to go into the STIP, that 10-year financial planning document, just with the quantitative scores alone. So the statewide mobility funding category is going to be programmed by those folks. And then they're going to make an announcement that shows, hey, here's the quantitative scores from prioritization. And here are the projects that were selected at the statewide mobility category. And this information is released at this time so that our planning organizations and our divisions are able to look at this information and make decisions so that they can put their local input points on the remaining projects, based on the information of the projects that were funded at statewide mobility and also those quantitative scores. So once everybody has their quantitative scores and their statewide mobility, they will work with their boards, their TACs, transportation advisory committees, councils, to put the local input points for the regional impact projects. Once we get those local input points back, we give that information back to our programming folks, and they, work on the numbers, get the projects that are selected for funding in the regional impact category. They add those to the 10-year financial planning document. And then we follow that same process again. So folks are able to look at how projects were selected for regional impact. Then they can determine how to use their local input points for the final division needs category of projects. And then once we get those points back, the STIP unit or the folks who develop that 10-year financial planning document can finish up the STIP, program the last set of projects that have been selected. And then ultimately that makes the STIP, the 10-year financial planning document. All right, so here is the schedule right now for P8. So we're on our 8th round of prioritization. I know this is a lot, so we can kind of walk through it really quickly. And we are here, here in the red. So as we mentioned before, we officially solicit projects for prioritization. We have a work group session where we work on making improvements to the program. That typically starts in October. Every 2 years, I should say that the prioritization cycle typically occurs every 2 years. So P8 started back in 2024 in October with that work group. The work group wrapped up last year in May, and the work group made their final recommendations for changes for P8 to NCDOT's Board of Transportation, and that was adopted in July of last year. And then once we had the approval of how the process would work for P8, we had our project submittal window. So folks submitted their projects last year from July through September. And since September, our spot office has been working to do that data review and scoring. So we are going through with eligibility. We're looking at the quantitative data, making sure that everything looks right for our projects. And we will ultimately be able to give the project scores to the programming unit once we're finished with this process. In March, we have something called partner data review, where our partners are able to look at the data that we're using to score projects and just make sure that everything looks okay on their end too. We have about 980 highway projects, over 2,000 total projects competing in P8. So having as many eyes as possible looking at this data is incredibly helpful to make sure that we are being as accurate as possible and giving every project the best chance it can get to get funded. So that's going to be happening in March, so in a few short weeks, and then we'll have a month after we get that information back, and so we'll be releasing the scores in May. So project scores and statewide mobility is set to be released in a few months. Then we'll have the local input point assignment windows. So the regional impact projects will be out first, and then we'll have the division needs local input points windows, and then the STIP unit will wrap everything up and have the STIP ready with a bow on by the beginning of next year, hopefully. And the cycle will keep going on and on. So as things are slated right now for following the 2-year cycle, we should be starting our work group for P9 in October of this year. So things are always going on at the spot office. I also wanted to point out the local input opportunity here. I know that many projects all projects submitted in prioritization are important projects, but I know folks on this call probably have projects that they care about specifically, and I wanted to just plug the local input opportunity for your bicycle and pedestrian projects. That would be during the division needs local input point assignment. So you can a lot of times those local input points are posted for public comment, public review, things like that. So if you're interested in that, I would highly recommend reaching out to the submitters and the stakeholders who are submitting your projects. And just as a reminder, local input points come from the NCDOT divisions and from the planning organizations where the project is located. So having support from both is very important to help your project score high. All right. Key takeaways. How do I get my project in the STIP through this process? So the project has to be submitted through an MPO, an RPO, or a division in the area where it's located. And then they have to score high enough to make it into the STIP, or the 10-year financial planning document. Who do you need to work with to get your project funded? So local support is crucial for matching funds, as y'all know. Also, your support from your MPOs, RPOs, and divisions is crucial for your local input score. And one thing to consider is that submitters are required to have a methodology for how they assign local input points to a project. So you might want to keep an eye out for what the methodology for your respective areas says, and see if there's anything that you need to keep in mind with that. And then what questions should I ask about my project? Do you have political support for your project? Because that's going to be really important. Do you have a match? Have you had conversations with important stakeholders? Do you have a cost estimate? And if so, when was the last time it was updated? Because sometimes it can take a while for those projects to be funded and then implemented. So it's good to just kind of keep that in mind as you're developing cost estimates. All right. And that's all I got. I know it's a lot. I know it's like drinking from a fire hose. That's how I feel too. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate y'all hearing my presentation.
Gretchen,
Well,
thank
thank you.
you so much. Julie, I did have a quick question. Sorry, I interrupted your thanking. Sorry. Gretchen, you talked about the schedule a little bit.
Mhm.
there is some variability, right? In the spot schedule. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because sometimes like that window, it feels like it sneaks up or it's a long way off, or like how do we tune into that better?
Yeah, absolutely. It, am I, is my screen saying thank you?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to scroll back to the slides, to the schedule. So the schedule is something that is recommended by the work group and ultimately adopted by the Board of Transportation. I will say that things have come up in the past that have caused the schedule to slip in some way, shape, or form. Um, P6 is a great example. That was in 2020. So P6 was paused altogether after quantitative scores were released just because of funding availability concerns, project cost concerns, things like that. So I think for P8, we should still be on schedule. Partner data review is coming up really soon for us. So we're working really hard to get that data ready for folks to review. But I will say, generally speaking, we try to communicate with our partners as much as possible with changes like that, um, where we would send out communication. But those types of decisions typically would need board approval and things like that.
Um, Shelley, you had put a couple of questions in here. Do you want to come off mute and ask, or do you want me to read your chat?
Sure. It's okay if you would like to read that. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
So the first one was our local MPO told me that the STIP made a change around the funding for standalone bike ped projects and that it was disallowed. So that the bike ped is only funded if it's affiliated with road projects, and that requirement has hampered development of greenways here in Western North Carolina. Um, and she understood that HB 282 has been introduced to change and allow funding of standalone bike ped projects. So what's the chance of a similar piece of legislation that could succeed?
All right. Yes, thank you for submitting that question. And I see that Andrew Meeker also made a really good point after
Yeah.
that about that as
Yeah.
well. Okay, so the state law still exists, but there's some things that should be in italics. I like how Andrew said, state transportation funds cannot go towards standalone bicycle and pedestrian projects, but other transportation fund or other state funds can. So that's a really important clarification. And I think I'm not sure what MPO you are at, but you're right. There is a distinction because the law specifically says that standalone projects, that's our other italics word, standalone projects cannot be funded using those state transportation dollars that are subject to the STI law. But if they are, we typically say ancillary, or they're like part of another project, they can't be the primary purpose of the project. But if they're part of another project, they can be. So we will see, roadway projects that include a sidewalk, or, you're bringing it up to standards, things like that. That's something to consider when you're thinking about projects. I will say that's much more challenging with greenway projects just by the nature of how those projects work. But that is kind of it's a very important caveat to that language.
Okay. Okay. So it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon, I guess. It's just but like you said, it's a challenge.
Yes, it's a challenge. I can't speak to how things are looking on the legislative front.
Okay.
But yeah.
I'll add, Shelley, that the Great Trail State Program, as Andrew mentioned, is a workaround for that,
Hmm.
and that's why sustained funding for that program is so vitally important.
Hmm.
And then also IMD, the intermodal division of DOT, is using some creative solutions so that they're using toll credits now to help fund to provide that local match to draw down the federal dollars. So everyone's in tune to sort of getting around this barrier to accessing federal funds for greenway projects.
I'll just tag on to that on a little bit with the Great Trail State Program, just to really reiterate that the loss of the state match for bike ped projects is an important um, part of the story of why the Great Trail State exists. Great Trail State Coalition exists is that made a tremendous impact on the development of trails all across North Carolina, but it particularly hit our rural communities hard, folks that didn't have access to those capital CIP dollars. So the Great Trail State Program, one of the things that our legislators were attracted to with that program was that the funds would be used to draw down federal dollars. And so it is, I hate to go back to where we started asking for more membership, but if getting the state match back, if continuing to have state dollars that can be leveraged for federal dollars are important to you, please let's help keep the coalition alive and vibrant and active so that we can partner with our agencies and advocate when it comes time for these issues to be decided in the future.
Thanks, Ayana and
Yeah.
Palmer. Thank you. And Gretchen.
So Gretchen, you've got there's one from Kristen here about if you can see online where the STIP current projects in district are and the scores specifically.
Yes.
Okay.
So all of that information is public, and I am going to share some links in the chat. So
Super.
the process I want to point out because it's going to be two different links. The prioritization process, what we do is really we're going through the process of scoring the projects. The funding is done by the STIP unit. I think that's by design. Like we have nothing to do with which projects are funded. We are the impartial group that scores the project and then we hand it over to our finance folks. So you're not going to see the scores for the projects in that STIP, the 10-year financial planning document, but our group does share the scores from previous rounds. So I can share the link to our prioritization data page, which is right here. So this page is our prioritization page that has that data. So if you're looking for the results from P7, which was our last completed round of prioritization, look in that prioritization 7 folder. And then this is the STIP website, which is going to have that 10-year financial planning document. And that map is great because if you have a project that's in the STIP that you care about, you can just zoom in on it and click on it.
And I know we're running out of time, but I want to add another comment and just to say how vitally important, if you have a trail project, to build our relationship with your local transportation planning organization, whether it's an MPO or an RPO, and just that local input point process can really change the positioning of and prioritization of a trail project. And that comes in with advocacy work with your local bike ped committee and such so that you can really change the outcome and advance your project if you work at the local level, building those relationships and those partnerships. I've seen it happen in Winston-Salem.
Okay, I'm gonna lift one more question because we've got one more minute. And this one's from Andrew about the ancillary bike ped in to road projects, and if you could speak to the complete streets review process and how trail advocates might influence it.
Yes, yes, of course. Andrew, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so NCDOT has a process that we call complete streets. I'm sure you all are familiar with complete streets, but it's basically just saying when you're working on a transportation project, you need to consider all modes as part of those projects. So complete streets really does come into play when you're doing roadway projects and you're thinking about like the cross section, like how should this project really look? And so we have a requirement that all projects funded through prioritization need to go through this complete streets process, which is managed by IMD. So IMD is the group that takes the first look and they make recommendations for complete streets elements for the projects. And it's going to be primarily based on the facility characteristics, or at least that's my understanding. Again, since this is kind of further down the line, I don't know how much it's changed in the past, but complete streets, I think if you're more interested, I would just keep it safe and say I would reach out to IMD about that.
Well, thank you so much, Gretchen, for this very clear, comprehensive presentation to help guide us through the process. And if everyone else on the call could please also join me in saying thank you to Gretchen for your time. And really, it's so wonderful to have such clear presentation and articulation in all of this. So really helpful and such a value for us at the coalition and all of our communities that are interested in getting these projects moved forward. So
Hey, Julie, will you remind folks how they can find this recording and our other recordings?
I will thank you for saying that. We're going to go to Great Trails State coalition.org/CTCT. And I'm getting the link right now to pop into the chat.
I gotcha. It's there.
Oh, thank you. Yes. So you can view all of our webinars there and register for upcoming presentations. I don't have the April one on there, but I hope to have it in the next 24 to 48 hours on SCORP. And I also am very interested in May or June hosting a webinar on projects. So if you have a Great Trail State program project that you were awarded or a complete the trail funds project, please be in touch and let me know if you'd be willing to share a brief summary of your work with that project. So thanks everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week and we'll see you next month, if not before then.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. Oh,
Thank
Frank,
you.
yes, you can come off mute.